Convertible sales have been on a decline in America for decades, but Mercedes is still incredibly dedicated to drop tops. You might be wondering, how dedicated are they? Well, Mercedes makes 6 different convertibles and multiple versions of each convertible. That is more convertibles available from the Mercedes brand than basically anybody else in America. They make a C convertible, the E400 convertible that we're looking at right here. They make an S-Class convertible, and if you prefer 2-seat roadsters, they have an SLC, an SL, and of course a GT. That's more variations of Mercedes convertible than you will find in the BMW and Audi lineup in America put together. BMW and Audi only make 4 convertibles each, and they don't have nearly the same number of engine options that we find at the Mercedes dealer. Porsche, of course, makes just 2 convertibles. Jaguar and Alfa Romeo only offer 1 each, and Infiniti and Lexus don't offer any convertibles in America at this time. Why are we starting out this video talking about how many convertibles Mercedes makes? Well, at the moment, it's because nobody else makes an E-Class sized convertible or priced convertible. There's a BMW 4 Series convertible, but at the moment there's no 6 Series convertible, which would theoretically be the 5 Series drop top. There's no Jaguar XF convertible. There's no Audi A6 convertible. So at the moment, the E-Class stands alone, and that is important to keep in mind because the C-Class convertible competes with the 4 Series convertible. The S-Class convertible competes with ultra high-end luxury convertibles if you want to spend $200,000, for instance, on your convertible. And the Mercedes Roadsters, like the SLC, SL, and GT, are the ones that compete with the Porsche convertibles and the Jaguar and Alfa Romeo convertibles. Up front, this is instantly recognizable as a modern Mercedes. We have this large Mercedes logo right there with the chrome bars on each side that are sort of aero-inspired. And then going with that sort of aerodynamic propeller theme, we have these 3D elements in the grille arranged in sort of a round pattern right there behind that Mercedes logo. Then we have multi-beam LED headlamps on each side with distinctive LED accent strips. You won't find fog lamps down below, but we do have well-integrated parking sensors. At 190 inches long, the E-Class convertible is about 3.8 inches shorter than an E-Class sedan. That's pretty common when they coupify or convertiblify a sedan to make it a little bit smaller. This is an important 5.5 inches longer than a Mercedes-Benz C-Class convertible and 9 inches shorter than a Mercedes S-Class convertible. At the moment, there is no corollary in the BMW lineup, so a BMW 4 Series convertible is 182 inches long, notably shorter than what we're driving right here, closer to the C-Class convertible. And an Audi A5 convertible is a little bit longer than the 4 Series, but still considerably shorter than the E-Class, also considerably less expensive. I suppose you could consider something like the Maserati Gran Turismo convertible competition to this, but its price tag is considerably higher than the Mercedes. It's $150,000 base, even though it's right about the same size as this. In terms of overall price, the E400 actually slots kind of in the middle of the C-Class lineup. It is a little bit more expensive than the base AMG 43, but less expensive than the top-end AMG trim of the C-Class. As with the S-Class convertible, this is a soft top, and I can operate it with the key. So if I press the key fob right here, the lock button, you'll notice that this lid opens right here. It's not the trunk lid, so it's kind of a handy feature because the rear view camera stays in place while the top is operating. And you'll notice the top pops out of this compartment. I'll stop it right here so you can see. The top is stowed in an area that is shared with the trunk, but is not exactly the trunk. And you can operate this top up to about 35 or 36 miles an hour out on the road. So that way you don't have to be completely stopped to do it. If you're at a stoplight and you start operating your top, you can drive off and not really worry too much about it. You can also lower the top with the remote if you so desire. So I press the unlock button and you'll notice that the top does the dance in reverse. It feels a lot slower while I'm filming it than when you're driving it. It actually doesn't take too much time to operate this top when you're out on the road. This is one of the faster tops that we've driven lately. Mercedes gives this car a few nice aerodynamic touches. For instance, if I press this button right here in the center console, we have a pop-up wind deflector right here that changes the angle of attack that the windscreen is giving the wind. That means that taller drivers are going to get less buffeting on their heads, and it's going to be a little bit quieter overall. You'll notice that at the same time this pops up, we have a pop-up wind deflector there in the back. So that way you don't have to worry about taking one out of the trunk, unfolding it, locking it into place over the rear seats. It simply collapses right back into the back there. And you can choose to have them up or down while the top is open. The reason is that buffeting changes based on the speed that you're driving. So at some speeds you may get less buffeting if they're up, at some speeds you may get less if they're down. The rear end styling is a little bit different than the E-Class sedan, but still definitely one of the Mercedes family. We have full LED tail lamp modules that wrap from the body on over to the trunk lid, with a very interesting design theme for the parking lamp section that's right here in the middle. Instead of a simple reflector that just gives you one plane of red shining through, they actually have what looks sort of like glitter on the inside, giving it more of a sparkly appearance. The turn signals are red, as you can see on that side of the car, not amber like we see in Europe. The other change for the US versus Europe is that we get these two blocks right here on each side of the license plate area to square it off, I guess, for the American license plate cover. Personally, I wish that these weren't there. I'm not sure if you could remove them, but it might be possible. We have dual integrated exhaust tips at the bottom of the bumper, and exhaust gases actually come out of these. I realize that's weird to say, but many modern Audi models, exhaust gases don't actually come out of their tips, but it does in this Mercedes. Behind this Mercedes logo, we find the trunk lid release. This is also where they hide the backup camera to keep the rear nice and clean. At the moment, you'll find only one engine under this hood. It's a 3-liter 6-cylinder twin-turbo engine, producing 329 horsepower and 354 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a 9-speed automatic transmission, and you can get all-wheel drive in this convertible if you want to. Coming soon, there will be an E53, which will receive the brand new Mercedes-Benz inline-6 turbocharged engine and their mild hybrid system. That combination will give you 429 horsepower and 384 pound-feet of torque, thanks to a 21 horsepower electric motor mated to the engine and the 9-speed automatic transmission. Although we haven't heard any specific rumors, you can bet that it's only a matter of time until Mercedes puts more powerful AMG engines under this hood, because that seems to be what they do with most of their vehicles. So if you're really looking for a higher horsepower AMG, then you may just have to wait a little bit or get an E400 right now and replace it with something later. Because I'm clearly a car nerd, when I think of the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, I think of windshield wipers, interestingly enough, because they have always had kind of interesting windshield wiper arm designs, and we still see an articulating arm right over here on the passenger side, just in case you're wondering. And because this is a convertible and it's a Mercedes convertible, the German engineers have decided to make the windshield wiper spray only on the downward stroke, and the spray comes out the length of the windshield wiper so that way you don't spray yourself while you're driving topless. Front seat comfort is excellent, but it's a little bit tricky to give this a score because we're talking about a vehicle in a segment of one. We have a multi-way power driver seat with an extending thigh cushion and a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and we also have a 4-way tilt telescopic steering column. I think that these seats are a little bit more comfortable than anything we find in the Mercedes-Benz C-Class convertible, but obviously not quite as comfortable or as adjustable as what we see in the Mercedes-Benz S-Class convertible. If you've seen one of these convertibles out in the wild, you may have noticed what appear to be sort of computer cooling fans integrated right here into the front headrests. These are part of the Mercedes-Benz air scarf system. It draws air in the back of this headrest, heats it up, and then blows it out up front on the headrest to keep your neck warm in colder weather. It sounds gimmicky in a way, but it actually works very, very well. These headrests are 4-way adjustable designs. They move forward and backward with this button right here, and then they move up and down with the electric controls on the door. As with most convertibles, hopping into the back is pretty easy because you simply drop the top, move the front seat, and then of course hop into the rear. We don't find height adjustable headrests back here, however. These are fixed into place, and we do have a rollover protection system obviously in this vehicle, but the headrests do not move up. They do hit me just a little bit low on the back, sort of between the shoulder blades, but I actually have a surprising amount of legroom back here. Sitting right here behind myself, my knees are just barely touching the seat back, but the footwell is generously sized. I could actually sit back here for 30-45 minutes if I needed to. Now we do get a little bit more wind buffeting back here than in the front, but thanks to the pop-up wind deflectors, we actually get a quieter experience back here than in many convertibles. This is still a solid 4-seater, so there is no center seat. Instead, we get 2 very small cup holders right there. Because of the overall design of the E-Class and, of course, that pop-up windshield, we don't have a trunk pass-through. Let's find out how the headroom is now. I'm going to go ahead and put up the top using the button on the remote control because I can't reach the one up front, and we'll see how this goes. Well, it didn't bop me on the head, which is good. Now, if I sit upright back here, my head is definitely touching the top, but fortunately, this is actually a very softly padded top, so it's really not too much of a problem. This is the kind of seat that I could easily sit in for 30 or 45 minutes if I needed to when the top is in place like that, but it is a little bit more comfortable if the top is actually down. In reality, I suspect that most folks will just use the back for their luggage storage, however. Because that top has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is sort of between the rear seats and this trunk lid right here, we do see a change in the overall trunk shape when the lid is down. It becomes a little bit shallower in the vertical dimension, and that's why we have this cargo sort of divider or blocker right there. It's power actuated with this button on the trunk, so we don't have a power trunk lid. Instead, this activates this little box right here that comes down and signals where the top is going to go in the trunk. You still can put one 22-inch roller bag, which is the largest size you can carry onto a domestic flight, right back here. You could probably also fit a pair of golf clubs, but it would be a little bit tricky to fit two bags of this size. You might be able to fit one slightly smaller, maybe 20-inch roller bag on this side with the top down. And because of the overall shape of this bag, I can just barely squeeze it under that top. So in this position, you actually could put two of those 22-inch roller bags and either a slightly larger roller bag right there behind, or perhaps another 22-inch roller bag and still close the trunk lid. It's actually relatively handy for a convertible. I can put the bags in this position right there and easily close the trunk lid. As far as convertibles go, this scores fairly well in our exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. I'm going to give this 4 out of 10 points. Hopping on the inside, you can see that cargo pass-through right back there and those fold-down sections of the rear seats. The front seats are aggressively bolstered to help hold you into place. The leather upholstery is heated and ventilated. That's why we find those perforations in the middle. And then from this angle, you can see the extending thigh cushion up front. As you'd expect from a vehicle like a Mercedes-Benz E-Class, the front doors are made from entirely soft-touch materials on the upper section, and then just a little bit of hard plastic right down here at the bottom by that bottle holder. Again, remember that this is priced between the S-Class and the C-Class, so we find better interior materials than in the C-Class and slightly less expensive materials than the S-Class. Although we'd still find a great deal of real wood trim. It's a little bit difficult to tell, of course, right here in this lighting because this is the darkest shade of wood trim available, but it is open pore trim. We also have laser cut metal grates for that Burmeister sound system. On the doors is where we find the seat controls as well as the heating and ventilation for that seat. Moving on over to the dashboard, we again find more of that real wood trim as well as a stitched dashboard, and that goes for the upper section right there, as well as the main section of the dashboard. And then we have these very interestingly shaped vents. I will zoom in on this one here so you can see what's going on. These are incredibly attractive, actually. I was surprised how much I like the shape of this vent. However, in terms of overall functionality, they do fall down a little bit for me. You rotate the vent like this to close it. So if this section is in the vertical orientation, it's closed. If it's horizontal like that, it's open. Unfortunately, they don't actually direct air around very well. So if they're pointed in the down position, air doesn't really go down towards your leg area or your hip area very well. In the middle of everything, we have two very large LCDs. This is very similar to what we see in the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. This is not one continuous LCD, it is two separate units, but they're in the same housing, so it makes it look like it is one very long display all the way across the dashboard. This houses our typical infotainment system, so the Mercedes-Benz command system with Apple CarPlay, as well as factory navigation, our usual media interface. We have vehicle settings, system settings as well. This is where you can adjust the climate control, the way the dynamic vehicle systems operate, the assistance systems consumption, etc., as well as the ambient light settings. Ambient lighting happens behind this screen, very much like we see in the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, but because of the smaller size of this cabin, it's a little bit difficult to see from this angle. It is actually lit above the display right there and below the display, as well as below the wood trim right here on the dashboard. The color is selectable. Below that, we have our 2-zone automatic climate control. Menu button right here to get you on over to the climate menu inside the command system right there. Direct access buttons for Navi, radio, media, telephone, vehicle settings right there, hazard light button. Behind this wood storage cubby, we find two large cup holders, USB input for CarPlay and smartphone integration with that system, and then a wireless charging mat right there. I was able to fit two large sodas in these cup holders here, although their tops do bash one another. Behind that, we have our typical command controls. We have a rotary knob here, and then on top of it, a touchpad. We've seen this in Mercedes-Benz models for a while. It's important to know that when you're interacting with CarPlay, you can only use the click wheel. You can't actually use this touchpad for navigating around, but you can tap it for selecting options. We have home button, track forward button, back button right there, drive mode button right here. This allows us to choose between Eco, Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus, and Individual. Button to turn off the parking sensors, activate the backup camera or 360-degree camera, auto start, stop, enable, disable button, and then on this side we have a volume knob and then a power button to turn on and off the command system. Behind that we have a different bank of buttons that we don't see in many Mercedes models because of course this is a convertible. So this button right here raises and lowers all 4 windows at the same time. This operates the power top. This operates the wind deflectors in the back of the vehicle and of course the front of the vehicle. And then this button here opens this center console storage area. This is where we find 2 more USB ports and an SD card slot. On the driver's side, we have this very large LCD instrument cluster. It is actually so large that in many seating positions, it's a little bit difficult to see this upper corner over here on the left and this upper corner over here on the right behind the steering wheel because the display is so large. There are multiple different display layouts, and they can be adjusted via controls on the steering wheel or via the command system in the center of the dashboard. We have more of a classic layout that you can see right here. We also have a sport-inspired theme with yellow numbers over here on the speedometer. You can choose what you want to see on each side, whether you want to see more of an eco display, fuel consumption like we had before, navigation information right over there on that side, or you could have just a tachometer. Via the controls, you can also choose what you want to see in the middle, whether you want to see just media information. For instance, right there in the middle, we'd have Bluetooth, but no Bluetooth is connected at the moment. You can also get radio information, trip information, or drive assist information right like that. The display is controlled via this touch-sensitive button on the steering wheel. There's one on each side of the wheel. The one on the left side here controls the LCD right here in front of the driver. The one on the right side of the steering wheel controls the LCD in the middle of the dashboard. The controls are very similar. I press this home button to pull up a menu, and then I swipe across this control, sort of like using an older BlackBerry device. And then if I want to select this particular option, say phone, as you can see right there, I simply click down. Overall, this is a pretty intuitive way of interacting with menus in the vehicle. You can swipe up and down or left and right. So for instance, if I were to go back to the trip computer info there, I would swipe up and down to get the various different screens available on that trip computer readout. The left side of the wheel is also where we find a mute button and then volume up down. On the right side of the wheel, we find dedicated phone buttons. Again, one of those other touch buttons for controlling the screen right there in the center of the dashboard, a voice command button, and then another home and back button. We also have shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel, up on the right and down on the left. As with other Mercedes models, the cruise control is activated via this stalk that does not turn with the steering wheel. It toggles up and down for accelerate, decelerate, and in and out for set and cancel. You adjust the following distance with this rotary knob at the end. A common question lately has been, where do we film cars? I typically film cars in my driveway or somewhere else on my property. And some of you have asked what the view you're seeing when you're watching these videos is. Oftentimes this is just vistas out from my driveway. I live in the redwood forest, so right now it's a bit of a foggy day. The fog is starting to clear, so you can see it burning off there in the distance right there above those trees. In our 0 to 60 test, this model went from 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds, which is exactly what Mercedes said it should do. If you get the rear-wheel drive version, then supposedly it's a little bit slower because of overall traction issues. Now, it is important to keep in mind that 5.3 seconds, 0 to 60, seems to be when this vehicle is in its sport mode, not in the comfort or eco mode, because in comfort and eco, this transmission defaults to starting out in second gear, not first gear, and there is a little bit of a difference in terms of acceleration if you're starting out in second. In our 60 to 0 braking test, this vehicle went from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 120 feet. That stopping distance is a little bit longer than the sedan or the coupe, logically, because of the changes that had to be made to the vehicle in order to drop its top. As with most coupe convertible pairs, the coupe version is going to be lighter than the convertible version, so it's going to stop better, it's going to handle a little bit better as well. Overall handling is still very good for a convertible, but you can definitely tell that the structure is not as rigid as the coupe, and that's just the nature of the convertible beast. There really is no convertible out there that's going to be as rigid as a coupe version that has a solid fixed roof in place. And that is noticeable when you start driving this out on off-camber situations where the road really has a lot of bend to it, or you're driving over potholes where the road undulates quite a bit. You can hear just a little bit of creak from the windowsills, etc. But overall handling is still very, very good, just as you'd expect from a modern Mercedes. In terms of overall handling scores, that's a bit tricky. I suppose I should give this a B because it's not going to handle as well as an E400 coupe, and that's really the only thing I can compare this to since there isn't anything like it from the competition. Something like the Gran Turismo from Maserati is going to handle a little bit better than this, but you'd expect it to for $150,000. This isn't going to handle quite as well as the less expensive trim of the AMG C-Class convertible, even though the price tag is quite similar. Out here on this rougher gravel road, the E400 still delivers an excellent ride, even though handling is very good. Now, the model of E400 that we're driving does not have an adaptive suspension system, so this cannot adapt to become firmer or softer. The drive mode button in the center console simply affects the way the steering, transmission, and engine behave. If you're looking for a tighter, sportier ride, then something like one of the Mercedes-Benz C-Class convertibles, especially the AMG versions, would be the one to pick. I suspect that the upcoming AMG version of the E-Class is still going to be a little bit softer, a little bit more livable than those C-Class models. And of course, if you want the ultimate in comfort, the S-Class is the model for you. Depending on the trim of the Roadster you get, the Mercedes Roadsters could fall on either end of what we're driving right here, depending on how they're configured. Clearly, the first thing we need to do is drop the top out on the road. And again, I can do that up to about 36 miles an hour or so. So this is an awful lot more convenient than some of those hardtop convertibles where you do have to be practically standing still in order to lower the lid. That means that in my area here, I can very easily get the top down before I even hit the main road. That also means that if you're in an area that gets summer rain, it's a lot easier to close the top at a moment's notice without really interrupting your travel too much. Back out here on the paved road, the ride quality is exactly where you'd want it to be for a car designed for a weekend away. If you're going out wine tasting, if you're just driving out on your favorite winding mountain road like this, even if it's a less than perfect road, this is still a very comfortable ride. And I think it is an absolute excellent balance of handling ability and ride. If you start to push this car just a little bit harder in the corners, you will hear just a little bit of complaint from the tires, but overall it accomplishes the task very well. In our cabin noise test, this model at 50 miles an hour came in at 74 decibels. That is pretty typical for a convertible. It's louder than the coupe version, obviously. It's also going to be louder than the sedan or the station wagon version of the E-Class. But as far as luxury coupes go, this is still very good. Keep in mind that this is a soft convertible top, not a hard convertible top. Generally speaking, the hard convertible tops are going to be a little bit quieter, but the multi-layer top that we have on the E-Class is still very, very quiet. Remember that when it comes to cabin noise scores, road surface and road noise is a very important factor here. Wind noise is logically very consistent across road surfaces because the road surface doesn't have much to do with the overall wind noise in a vehicle. But road surface definitely does. That means that one car on a very smooth road surface could be quieter than another, if the overall vehicle design, tire size, etc. allow more road noise to come into the cabin. In terms of overall fuel economy, we've been averaging 22.5 miles per gallon, which is pretty good for a large 4-seat convertible like this. I'm going to give this overall a B when it comes to fuel economy, because logically you will find vehicles in a similar price range, but not necessarily the same size range, that get slightly better fuel economy. Keep in mind that we are driving the all-wheel drive version of the E400, and that is going to take about a 1 mile per gallon toll on your overall fuel economy. Pricing for the E400 Cabrio starts at $66,300. If you want the all-wheel drive version, that bumps the base price up to $68,800. At this point in time, we know that there will be more powerful engines coming, but we don't know exactly how much those AMG flavors will cost. Expect a pretty decent price bump from the E400 on up into the AMG trims, however. In terms of overall price, the E-Class sits between the C-Class convertible and the S-Class convertible, just like the E-Class sedan versus the C-Class sedan and the S-Class sedan. But it actually, price-wise, is a little bit closer to the C-Class. It's about $15,000 more than the C-Class, but nearly $70,000 less than an S-Class convertible. The S-Class convertible is very, very expensive. And that's why making comparisons with the E-Class is a little bit tricky, because it sits in this middle range, but it's not as expensive as some of the other vehicles that are a little bit below the S-Class but above the average C-Class convertible, 4 Series convertible, etc. And of course, making comparisons even more tricky, there are a number of Mercedes convertibles that are actually right around the same price as the E400. For instance, the SLC 43 or the C43 AMG, they're going to be right in the same price range as the E400 model that we were driving this week. Theoretically, you would trade the extra performance for some loss in rear legroom especially, and overall interior styling and overall interior trappings. The E-Class convertible interior is based off of the E-Class sedan interior, so it is a nicer place to spend your time than the C-Class, quite logically, just as we see in the sedan lineup. To keep all of our bases covered, the reason that we aren't comparing the E-Class to the 4 Series convertible is not just that it's bigger, but it's also more expensive. A 4 Series starts at $42,900, notably less than the E400, but right at the same price range as the C-Class. Similarly, the Audi A5 Cabrio is significantly less expensive, and you would have to bump yourself all the way on up to an S-Class Cabrio to even get close to the base price of the E400. So as a result, we aren't going to have our usual comparison section in this video. Instead, I would just say that if you're shopping for a luxury convertible that's a little bit bigger, a little bit roomier, this is a great option because it's the only option in the luxury segment. Also, if you're looking for something that's perhaps a little bit off the beaten path, this could be a good alternative, but something that's not going to be quite as expensive as that next step up in line. At this point in time, we don't have a 6 Series convertible. It's possible that BMW may actually not give us a 6 Series convertible. They may actually just give us an 8 Series convertible. If they do that, it's likely going to be priced more like the Mercedes-Benz S-Class convertible, so again, not a true direct competitor in this particular segment. With all of that out of the way, be sure and let me know what you think about the E-Class convertible down there in the comment section below. Click on over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/AlexandAutos. Hit that subscribe button up there at the top of your screen if you haven't already done so. Also click on over to patreon.com if you want to support this channel. I'll see you next week.